These are more sample chapters from Royal Birthright Defined, Part 2, the fourth retreat night of the Royal Birthright series. In these sample chapters, we meet the Maccabees, a godly family intent on upholding the sacred covenant of their faith against the Greek cultural attacks on their Jewish traditions. In this narrative, we see a harbinger of the end times Antichrist, a foreshadowing of things to come. As you listen, you may hear familiar themes of degrading a godly worldview under the guise of enlightenment and cultural progress. This tactic is not new to Satan. It has succeeded many times and brought down many nations that had once pursued the blessings of God. Only the beginning of the Maccabean revolt is told here. To continue the narrative leading to the origins of Hanukkah, get Royal Birthright Defined Part 2 of the Royal Birthright book series. You will find more information about the books at the link in the description below. royalbirthright.com. Enjoy the chapters.
Chapter 31. Belly and Thighs of Brass. Ideas challenging tradition. Political landscapes shifted like desert sands, bringing with it winds of change that would reshape the entire known world. The Persian Empire, which had seemed invincible, began to show signs of fracture. Alexander of Macedon emerged as an overwhelming force, his ambitions burning brighter than the sun over the Mediterranean. In Jerusalem, the tension between internal religious conflicts and external political threats created a melting pot of unprecedented challenge. The city that had struggled to rebuild now faced a new kind of threat, the approach of a conqueror that no empire had been able to stop. Jadua, the high priest, understood the precarious moment. The scrolls of prophecy spoke of kingdoms rising and falling, of great powers that would sweep across the land like a consuming fire. But prophecy was one thing. The reality of Alexander's approach was another. Persian governors watched the horizon with increasing anxiety. Their empire, which had seemed eternal, now faced a force that defied traditional military understanding. Alexander moved with military precision and a vision that consumed everything in its path. The Samaritan-Jerusalem divide momentarily seemed insignificant in the face of this approaching storm. Eleazar, the Samaritan priest, and the Samaritan leadership watched with a mixture of fear and calculated opportunity. Perhaps this new conqueror would provide a chance to reset the religious and political landscape. An elderly scribe recorded the moment with prophetic insight. Kingdoms rise and fall like breath on a mirror. Alexander's approach was a cultural revolution, a movement that would redesign world power. Greek language, Greek philosophy, Greek understanding, all would sweep across territories like a transformative wind. In the temple courts of Jerusalem, the priests began a different kind of preparation. Not just military, not just political, but spiritual. The scrolls were carefully protected, genealogical records preserved, the core of their identity prepared for whatever might come. Past failures had taught them well to never again lose the sacred writings of the great king. Jadua, the high priest, prepared with a mixture of trepidation and deep spiritual understanding. The scrolls of prophecy had spoken of great kingdoms, of moments when divine purpose would intersect with human ambition. This felt like such a moment. Persian governors fled before Alexander's approach, their once mighty empire crumbling like clay vessels. But Jerusalem stood not in defiance, but in a state of breathless faith. The night before Alexander's arrival, Jadua performed an extraordinary ritual. Dressed in the high priest's sacred garments, the breastplate of judgment, the ephod, the intricate vestments that connected heaven and earth, he led a procession of priests through Jerusalem's newly rebuilt streets. Torches illuminated the city walls. Their reflections seemed to carry the weight of generations. The priests sang ancient songs of deliverance, their voices a living testimony to survival, to covenant, to a great king larger than immediate political reality. When Alexander approached, instead of the expected military confrontation, one that nobody had anticipated unfolded. The Macedonian king, at the head of his conquering army, suddenly stopped. Witnesses spoke of this moment as one that defied rational explanation. Alexander, the man who had conquered everything in his path, approached the Jewish delegation with unexpected reverence. Jaddua stood dressed in the full high priestly garments, surrounded by priests and elders. The scrolls of prophecy were carefully displayed, a silent testimony to strength beyond military might. In the accounts preserved by scribes, Alexander approached and bowed. Not a political gesture, but a symbol of recognition. "I know you," Alexander reportedly said to Jaddua. "I have seen you in a dream before my conquest began." Alexander revealed an even deeper motivation. "I do not bow to you," he said, "but to the great king who has guided my path." The priests recorded that Alexander was shown the prophecies that spoke of his own coming, passages that described kingdoms rising and falling, that mapped out the very moment they were experiencing. Parmenion, Alexander's closest advisor, asked in confusion why the great conqueror had shown such respect to a small religious delegation in a conquered territory. Where conquest was expected, sovereignty emerged. Alexander granted Jerusalem significant autonomy, respected their religious practices, positioned them with a unique status within his expanding empire. The aftermath of Alexander's visitation transformed Jerusalem in ways no one could have anticipated. Greek culture began to flow into the city like water finding its way through stone crevices, subtle at first, then with increasing intensity. Jaddua understood the insidious challenge. Greek philosophy, language, and cultural practices would test the very foundations of their covenant identity. Some young priests saw opportunity in this cultural exchange. In the marketplaces, Greek merchants arrived not only with trade goods. They brought ideas that challenged a way of life. Philosophical debates erupted in the temple courts, young scholars wrestling with concepts of logic and reason that challenged their understanding of the sacred texts. A group of young priests began to study Greek texts with an intensity that terrified the religious leadership. They would gather in small groups, discussing Aristotelian logic, exploring philosophical concepts. The Samaritan leadership watched these developments with a mixture of suspicion and calculated interest. Their ongoing conflict with Jerusalem momentarily seemed less significant in the face of this immense cultural conversion. Eleazar, the Samaritan high priest, wrote of this moment, "The world is changing faster than our ability to understand it. The great king moves in ways that confound our thinking." Greek language began to infiltrate daily conversation. Young children learned Greek alongside their traditional languages. The sacred texts began to be translated, a process that would have been unthinkable just a generation earlier. Their homeland's very name translated to its Greek form, from Judah to Judea. Not everyone welcomed this change. The older priests saw it as a potential spiritual threat. "We are being consumed," one elder warned, "not by political conquest, but by pagan ideas." The young scholars who studied Greek philosophy discovered many of the philosophical concepts seemed to dance around the edges of their sacred understanding, supplementing their deepest spiritual insights. A young scribe named Eleazar, not to be confused with the Samaritan priest, wrote a remarkable text exploring the intersection of Greek philosophical thought and their covenant understanding. His writings attempted to be a bridge between two seemingly incompatible worlds. Drawing from both Judaism and Greek philosophical traditions, particularly the measured reasoning of the Stoics, he wove together threads of wisdom from both traditions. Where others saw only conflict between Greek logos and Hebrew faith, Eleazar proposed harmony. His careful translations and commentaries revealed how the eternal truths of Torah could speak to Greek minds without losing their essential character. Each carefully chosen word was a stepping stone across the cultural divide, each metaphor a window through which Greeks might glimpse the depths of Hebrew wisdom, and Jews might recognize universal truths in Hellenic thought. Yet this was no academic exercise. In an age when many Jews faced pressure to abandon their ancestral ways, Eleazar's work offered a different path. One could engage with Greek thought while remaining rooted in covenant faith. His writings suggested that wisdom need not be a zero-sum game, that the light of understanding could shine through multiple prisms without diminishing its source. While appearing enlightened, it began to sow the seeds of division. Not all saw such wisdom in this cultural bridge building. Some viewed these intellectual accommodations as the first step toward apostasy, a slippery slope that would lead their people away from covenant truth. They whispered of how Greek culture had already begun to penetrate the upper classes, how the subtle poison of foreign philosophy threatened to dissolve the bonds that held their people together. Their fears were not necessarily unfounded. Some Hellenized Jews had indeed turned against their own, siding with those who sought to destroy Jewish faith and culture. This Hellenistic influence brought challenges. Some young priests began to adopt Greek customs, challenging the most traditional interpretations of their covenant practices. Debates erupted about cultural preservation versus cultural progress. The generation that followed Alexander's encounter became an indoctrinated population beyond Babylon's past wildest dreams for Judea. Where previous generations had been directed by sacred principles and traditions, these young Jews found themselves navigating a world of concepts that would have previously been deemed preposterous or repulsive. In the schools of Jerusalem, Greek and Hebrew intertwined like vines. Young scholars studied philosophy alongside sacred texts, taught to see open-minded resonances. A brilliant young teacher named Simon would challenge his students to view their covenant not as a fortress, but as a living, breathing understanding of the divine evolving. The calendar transformation from solar to lunar cut deeper than any administrative change. Each new moon now marked time in a way that felt foreign to their soul's ancient rhythm. The agricultural cycles that had guided their festivals since Moses, carefully aligned with the sun's annual journey, were now forced into an artificial dance with lunar phases. Sacred moments became disconnected from their natural anchors in creation. Our fathers knew when to plant by the sun's position, an elderly farmer explained to his confused grandson. The festivals aligned perfectly with the harvest, firstfruits, weeks, tabernacles, each celebration rising naturally from the land's cycles. Now, he gestured helplessly at the new moon. Now we celebrate when Greek calculations tell us to, not when the earth and sun speak their ancient wisdom. The priests felt this disruption most keenly. The daily, weekly, and annual rhythms that had woven their people's spiritual life into the very fabric of creation were being unpicked thread by thread. Sabbaths began to drift from their fixed positions. Festival times, once as reliable as the seasons themselves, now required complex calculations and adjustments. Zadok sat reading the ancient text of Jubilees to the priests. For there will be those who will assuredly make observations of the moon, how it disturbs the seasons and comes in from year to year 10 days too soon. For this reason the years will come upon them when they will disturb the order, and make an abominable day, the day of testimony, and an unclean day a feast day, and they will confound all the days, the holy with the unclean, and the unclean day with the holy, for they will go wrong as to the months and Shabbats and feasts and jubilees. And they placed them on the heavenly tablets, each had 13 weeks. From one to another passed their memorial, from the first to the second, and from the second to the third, and from the third to the fourth. And all the days of the commandment will be 52 weeks of days, and these will make the entire year complete. Thus it is engraved and ordained on the heavenly tablets. And there is no neglecting this commandment for a single year or from year to year. And command you the children of Israel that they observe the years according to this reckoning, 364 days, and these will constitute a complete year, and they will not disturb its time from its days and from its feasts. For everything will fall out in them according to their testimony, and they will not leave out any day nor disturb any feasts. But if they do neglect and do not observe them according to his commandment, then they will disturb all their seasons, and the years will be dislodged from this order. And they will disturb the seasons, and the years will be dislodged, and they will neglect their ordinances. And all the children of Israel will forget and will not find the path of the years, and will forget the new months and seasons and Shabbats, and they will go wrong as to all the order of the years. This is no small thing, Zadok warned the temple council. When we lose the rhythm the great king established in creation itself, we lose our place in his symphony. Our children will grow up hearing a different song, marking time to a foreign drummer, their very souls beating to a rhythm that leads them further from home. Even the daily temple services felt the strain. The morning and evening sacrifices, once perfectly aligned with sunrise and sunset, now followed arbitrary hours set by Greek timekeeping. The sacred dance between heaven and earth, once so natural it felt like breathing, now required conscious effort, like trying to walk in step with music playing in the wrong time signature. The young priests argued that time was time, that these changes were just practical adjustments. But the elders understood. This was another form of exile, not from their land, but from their place in creation's sacred rhythm. Their people were being subtly choreographed into a dance that would lead them far from their covenant path. Zadok, the elder priest, lamented this change. "They seek to break us," he would tell younger priests, "through indoctrination, through the very way we mark time, our festivals, our harvests, our entire spiritual understanding, all now manipulated by a foreign cadence." Zadok pled with the young priests. These divisions form the sacred architecture of the year itself, not just marking time. Each quarter contained exactly 13 weeks, perfect and unchanging, like the stars wheeling overhead. From one season to another, the memorial days pass. This is the calendar of heaven itself, recorded on celestial tablets, a perfect solar year of 360 numbered days and 4 Tekufa days marking the seasons. Unlike the shifting lunar months that cause such confusion, these divisions remain as fixed as the foundations of creation. Each season flows naturally into the next, first to second, second to third, third to fourth, an unbroken circle of sacred time. These are not only remembrances but living connections to eternal truths, each one echoing through the chambers of time like a bell struck in perfect harmony with creation itself. This was how the great king had ordered time from the beginning, before men thought to reshape it according to their own understanding. But his words could not reach them. In the upper city of Jerusalem, where merchants and priests made their homes, the household of Joseph ben Jacob became a microcosm of the larger spiritual crisis. Once a respected family known for their dedication to temple service, they now lived the daily tension between tradition and worldly wisdom. The grandfather, Joseph, still rose before dawn each day to pray according to the ancient rhythms. His learned hands would trace the familiar texts, his lips forming words passed down through generations. But increasingly, his morning prayers were interrupted by the sound of his grandson, Alexander, named in a moment of cultural compromise that Joseph had opposed, heading to the gymnasium. "Where are you going so early?" Joseph would call out, though he already knew the answer. The boy's response came in Greek-accented Hebrew, his traditional prayer shawl replaced by the distinctive cloak of the gymnasium. "To train, grandfather. The games are coming, and I have a chance to represent Jerusalem." Joseph's daughter-in-law, Sarah, tried to bridge these worlds. She still kept a kosher kitchen, but now served Greek wines and hosted symposiums where her husband, Eli, discussed philosophy with other progressive Jewish merchants. She watched her son Alexander grow increasingly distant from the traditions that had anchored their family for generations. "He barely knows the prayers anymore," Joseph confided to his friend Zadok one Sabbath afternoon. "My own grandson recites Plato more easily than Psalms." "I know, old friend," replied Zadok with serious concern. Eli, Joseph's son, once a promising student of Torah himself, now saw opportunity in this cultural shift. His trading business flourished as he adopted Greek business practices. "The world is changing, father," he would argue. "We must change with it or be left behind." But it was the family's Sabbath table that most poignantly revealed the erosion of their customs. Where once they had shared ancient chronicles and sang traditional songs, now they sat in awkward silence, 3 generations speaking different spiritual languages. Alexander fidgeted, eager to return to his Greek studies. Eli attempted philosophical discussions that Joseph refused to engage. Sarah tried desperately to maintain peace, to find some middle ground that seemed to shrink with each passing week. "Tell me again about the Exodus," young Alexander once asked his grandfather, not from genuine interest but from a scholar's detached curiosity. I'm studying comparative mythology with my Greek tutor, and Joseph's hand trembled as he set down his cup, his voice thick with grief. These are not myths, child. This is who we are. Who you are, whether you remember it or not. Alexander felt sorry for his grandfather, trapped in an archaic mindset. He saw little hope for that generation to be enlightened. That night, Joseph wept in his chamber, for his grandson and for all the Alexanders in Jerusalem, for all the young souls being slowly reshaped by foreign wisdom, for all the sacred promises being traded for Greek dreams. Greek athletic practices had taken root. Young men who would once have spent their days in strict religious study now trained in gymnasiums, obsessed with sculpting their bodies in yet another form of cultural worship. The autonomy afforded by Alexander to Jerusalem was turning out to be more detrimental, more dangerous, more demoralizing than the armies of Babylon or Persia had been. This cultural shift created deep divisions. The most traditional priests saw these changes as wide-ranging compromise, while the enlightened priests saw the changes as inevitable. They would gather in the temple courts, their voices rising in heated debate about spiritual preservation versus cultural engagement. "We are losing our identity," the elder priests would declare. But the younger generation saw an opportunity to understand their covenant in a broader, more nuanced way. The Maccabean family watched these developments with increasing concern. They saw the cultural transformation as a potential threat to the very foundations of their spiritual identity. Political resistance began to take shape, a quiet but growing movement of Jewish cultural preservation. Eleazar, the Samaritan high priest, would observe these changes with a complex mixture of contempt and grudging respect. The ongoing animosity between Samaria and Jerusalem continued to be ignored in the face of these immediate cultural battles. A remarkable group of scribes began to emerge. They were translators both of language and of cultural knowledge. The translation of the sacred texts into Greek, the Septuagint, an insightful act of cultural bridge-building, was an undertaking that exceeded linguistic achievement. In the marketplaces, in the temple courts, in the quiet corners of Jerusalem, a new kind of identity was taking shape. Young people moved between worlds with a fluidity that would have been unimaginable to their grandparents. After the death of Alexander, political tensions were increasing. Having no heir, his conquered territories were divided among his top generals. The Ptolemaic, Egypt, and Seleucid Syria empires emerged as competing powers, with Jerusalem caught between the complex geography of their ambitions. Jajua's successors understood the precarious balance. They were both religious leaders and political navigators in a world of increasing complexity. The elderly priests who had witnessed Jerusalem's rebuilding now watched in quiet horror as that which was far more insidious than Babylon's armies was working its way through their people's very soul. Where Nebuchadnezzar had torn down walls of stone, Greek philosophy was dismantling walls of faith. Where Persian armies had held their young people in physical exile, Hellenistic thought was leading them into spiritual exile, and many went willingly, even eagerly. "We survived Babylon," Zadok would tell his remaining faithful students in the temple's hidden chambers, "because they could only capture our bodies. But this..." His voice would trail off as he watched young priests debating Greek philosophy in the courtyard, their traditional garments discarded for more fashionable Hellenistic dress. This captures the heart, and a captured heart forgets how to find its way home. The proselytization was as brash as it was subtle. Like water wearing away stone, Greek thought didn't attack their faith directly. It simply dissolved the foundations until the entire structure began to shift. The young men training in the gymnasium no longer saw anything wrong with pursuing physical perfection alongside spiritual understanding. The scholars studying Greek texts no longer noticed how far they had drifted from their ancestors' wisdom. The merchants adopting Greek business practices no longer recognized the spiritual compromises hidden in their transactions. What Alexander's armies hadn't pursued through force, his culture was achieving through attraction. Jerusalem stood intact, its walls rebuilt, its temple functioning, But within those walls, a different kind of destruction was taking place. The enlightened priests spoke of progress, of cultural progression, of new understanding. But the elders saw the truth. This wasn't evolution, it was erosion. Not understanding, but undermining. Not progress, but the subtle poison of compromise working its way through their people's spiritual bloodstream. The sun still rose over Jerusalem's walls, the temple fires still burned, the prayers were still said. But something essential was slipping away, as quiet as an ebbing tide, as unstoppable as time itself. The great king's covenant people were being remade in Greece's image, and few even recognized the intense tragedy unwinding in their midst. Chapter 32. The Maccabean Revolt. Seeds of Rebellion. The marble columns of the new gymnasium towered high above Jerusalem's ancient streets. Eleazar ben Aaron, a young priest, paused in his daily walk to the temple, watching as his childhood friend Josephus, who now called himself Jason, emerged from the building, his body oiled in the Greek fashion, a philosopher's scroll tucked under his arm. "You missed morning prayers again," Eleazar said softly, his eyes fixed on the golden dome of the temple rising behind them. Jason ran a hand through his carefully Greek-styled hair. "The gymnasium opens at dawn, my friend. And there's more wisdom in Plato than in endless ritual." He spoke the last word with a slight curl of his lip. "The world is changing, Eleazar. We must change with it." The year was 175 BC, and Jerusalem was a city caught between two worlds. In the markets, Greek merchants haggled in the international language of commerce while Orthodox Jews carefully maintained their separate ways. Young men like Jason increasingly adopted Greek names, Greek customs, Greek philosophies. The great king's covenant seemed to many like a relic of a simpler age. In the temple courts, the new high priest, Joshua, who also styled himself Jason, had begun subtle changes. The traditional solar calendar, which had guided Jewish life since ancient times, was gradually being replaced by the Greek lunar system. Priests argued in the courtyards about the timing of festivals, some clutching astronomical charts from Alexandria. "This is wisdom," the high priest would declare, showing off the new mathematical calculations. "This is progress." But in Modi'in, a day's journey from Jerusalem, Mattathias ben Johanan watched these changes with growing alarm. The aged priest gathered his 5 sons, Simon, Jonathan, Judah, Eleazar, and John, each evening to study the ancient texts, to remember who they were. "The great king's covenant is not a garment to be changed with the season," he would tell them, his stylus resting gently on the sacred words. "It is our very breath, our life itself." Simon, the eldest and most contemplative, would often stay after these sessions, questioning, probing deeper. "But Father, can we not take what is good from Greek wisdom while maintaining our faith?" Mattathias would gesture to the window, where the sunset painted the hills of Judea in honey tones. "Look there, my son. When the Greeks see that light, they imagine Apollo's chariot. When we see it, we remember the great king's first act of creation." These are not just different stories, they are different ways of seeing the world itself. In Jerusalem, the cultural transformation accelerated. After the fall of Alexander, the new Seleucid king, Antiochus IV, who styled himself Epiphanes, God manifest, saw in Judea an irritating pocket of resistance to his dream of a unified Hellenistic empire. He found willing allies among the urbanized Jewish aristocracy, who saw adherence to ancient laws as an impediment to progress. In the temple, young priests began to neglect the sacred rituals, hurrying through morning sacrifices to attend philosophical debates. The distinctive marks of Jewish identity, circumcision, dietary laws, Sabbath observance, became subjects of mockery among the enlightened classes. Zadok, leader of a group of conservative priests who formed the sect of the Essenes, began to see the signs of coming crisis. In a hidden chamber beneath the Temple Mount, he gathered his most trusted students. "What we preserve here," he told them, carefully unfurling a sacred scroll, may one day be all that remains of our true heritage. The great king's words must survive, even if the temple itself should fall. The tension reached Modi'in like a slow-burning fire. Mattathias watched as wealthy families began sending their sons to the new gymnasium in Jerusalem. He saw the gradual erosion of traditions, the subtle compromises that seemed harmless individually but formed a pattern of decay. His son Judah understood the military implications. "They don't need to defeat us in battle," he observed one evening. "They are conquering us through our own desires." In Jerusalem, the final transformation began. High priest Jason, eager to curry favor with Antiochus, offered to increase the tribute money in exchange for permission to make Jerusalem a full Greek polis. The construction of the gymnasium had been only the beginning. Now Greek educators were imported, Greek customs mandated, Greek gods introduced alongside, and increasingly in place of the worship of the great king. The temple treasury was steadily depleted to pay for these improvements. Sacred vessels were sold to fund Greek-style games. Young priests, descendants of Aaron, competed naked in the stadium, their circumcisions painfully concealed to avoid Greek mockery. In the 3rd year of Antiochus's reign, a new figure arrived in Jerusalem. Menelaus, a man from the tribe of Benjamin rather than the priestly line, approached the Seleucid court with an extraordinary offer. He would pay more tribute than Jason for the position of high priest. More importantly, he would accelerate the Hellenization of Judea. In the temple, Zadok watched as Menelaus was installed, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the sacred office had been sold to the highest bidder. "Money now determines what was once decided by divine right," he whispered to his fellow scribes. "The great king's house has become a marketplace." Menelaus' first act shocked even the Hellenized Jews. He stripped the temple of its golden vessels, sending them to Antioch as payment for his promised tribute. When elderly priests protested, they were silently removed from their positions, replaced by younger men who spoke Greek better than Hebrew. In Modi'in, news of these events reached Mattathias through his network of loyal priests. His son Jonathan, ever the diplomat, returned from Jerusalem with disturbing reports. "Menelaus has done what even Jason dared not do," Jonathan reported, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He's selling the sacred vessels, the very implements the great king commanded Moses to create." Judah, who had been sharpening his blade by the window, looked up. "And what do the people say?" "They're divided," Jonathan replied. "The merchants and aristocrats claim it's necessary for survival. The common people," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "they wait for someone to lead them." Simon, who had been quietly studying the ancient texts, closed his scroll. "And what of the prophecies? What do they say about such times?" Before anyone could answer, a commotion erupted in the street. A messenger, dusty from hard riding, burst into their home. "Jerusalem is in chaos," he gasped. "Menelaus' men murdered Onias." The room fell silent. Onias III, the last legitimate high priest, had been living in exile in Antioch, a constant reminder of the true priestly line. His assassination marked the end of any pretense of maintaining traditional authority. In the following weeks, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Antiochus, returning from a failed campaign in Egypt, found Judea in turmoil. False rumors of his death had sparked a brief rebellion in Jerusalem. His response would transform the cultural struggle into a darkness beyond the priest's worst fears. "These people do not need reform," he declared to his advisors. "They need to be broken." The decrees fell like a storm of iron and blood. Each proclamation was a dagger thrust into the heart of Jewish identity. Sabbath observance, now punishable by death, transforming a day of sacred rest into a potential execution. Circumcision, the ancient mark of covenant, became a crime so heinous it would cost a father or child their life. In the streets, Torah scrolls burned, not just destroyed, but consumed in public spectacles of humiliation. Sacred texts turning to ash while crowds watched in horrified silence. The smoke of burning scripture rose like a dark testament to cultural annihilation. But the true violation awaited the temple itself. Zeus Olympios would now reign where the great king's presence had dwelled. Antiochus, mad with power, drunk on his own divine delusion, transformed the holiest sanctuary into a profane altar of conquest. He declared himself a ruler, and the earthly embodiment of a foreign god, standing triumphant where generations of priests had once communed with the divine. Pagan priests dragged sacrificial animals into the temple's most sacred spaces, their hooves echoing against marble floors that had known only reverent Hebrew footsteps. Swine, the most unclean of creatures, were slaughtered on the altar where pure sacrifices to the great king had been offered for generations. Antiochus himself presided over the first sacrifice, his eyes blazing with a mixture of triumph and madness. The altar ran red with blood that was never meant to stain these holy stones. Incense of foreign gods clouded the air, the acrid smoke mixing with the metallic scent of sacrifice, obliterating centuries of sacred ritual. Where priests had once spoken the holy names and offered pure offerings, now foreign priests chanted to Zeus Olympios. The temple, sanctuary of divine presence, became a grotesque theater of cultural conquest. Each drop of blood, each foreign chant was a violation deeper than physical destruction. This was an assault on the very soul of a people, a rape of their most sacred space. The temple, once a beacon of spiritual purity, now stood desecrated, a monument to imperial arrogance, a wound in the very soul of a people. Even the angels cried. In the hidden chamber beneath Jerusalem, Zadok worked with desperate speed. "We can no longer wait," he told his scribes. "Begin the transfer to Qumran tonight. Every scroll, every sacred text, every copy." Young priests who had once only observed Greek customs now found themselves forced to participate in pagan rituals. Those who refused disappeared into Seleucid prisons. Mothers who circumcised their infants were paraded through the streets and executed along with their babies, their bodies left hanging on the city walls as warnings. In Modi'in, Mattathias gathered his sons in the pre-dawn darkness. "The time for patience has ended," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "We must decide now who we serve, the great king or the kingdom of men." Judah stepped forward first, placing his hand on his father's shoulder. "I serve the great king." One by one, his brothers joined him: Jonathan, Simon, Eleazar, and John, each man understanding that this commitment would likely cost them their lives. As dawn broke over the hills of Judea, the sound of marching feet echoed through Modi'in's streets. The king's officers had arrived, bringing with them an altar to Zeus and a simple demand: sacrifice or die. The moment of decision had come. The cultural transformation that had begun with gymnasiums and Greek names would now reveal its true face. The people of the covenant would have to choose between physical survival and spiritual death, or physical death and spiritual survival. In his heart, Mattathias already knew his choice. The real question was, how many would stand with him? The marketplace of Modi'in fell silent as the king's officer, Apelles, made his proclamation. His voice carried across the square, where people had gathered not by choice but by force, his words translated from Greek to Aramaic by a local collaborator. By decree of King Antiochus Epiphanes, manifest God and ruler of the Seleucid Empire, all peoples are to become one. All local customs are to cease. All separate identities are to be erased. In the crowd, Mattathias' youngest son John pressed close to his father's side. "They speak as if identity were a garment to be changed at will," he whispered. Mattathias said nothing, but his eyes never left the altar being constructed in the center of the square. The stone blocks seemed alien somehow, their clean Greek lines at odds with the ancient architecture of Modi'in. The collaborator, a man named Eupolemus who had once been a student of the Torah, stepped forward. "This is wisdom," he announced in perfect Hebrew. "This is survival. Look at what happened in Bethshean in Joppa. Those who resisted." He left the sentence unfinished, but everyone knew. The stories of massacres had spread throughout Judea. Apelles surveyed the crowd with the practiced eye of an experienced enforcer. He had done this in dozens of villages, and he knew the types: the eager collaborators, the silent resistors, the undecided masses. His gaze settled on Mattathias. "You," he said through the translator, "you are the priest of this village, yes? The one they call Mattathias ben Johanan?" Mattathias stepped forward, his 5 sons moving with him like a pride of lions. Apelles smiled, noting their protective formation. "You will be first," he declared. "Show your people the way of wisdom. Show them how to live in the new world." The altar was ready now, pig flesh laid upon it, the smoke of Greek incense rising into the morning air. The crowd held its breath. Everyone knew what was at stake. Compliance meant life, physical survival at the cost of spiritual death. Refusal meant execution of the individual, but often also of entire families. Mattathias felt the weight of every eye upon him. He thought of the scroll of Torah hidden in his home, of the prayers he had taught his sons, of the covenant that had defined his people since Sinai. He thought of the great king, whose name he dared not speak in this moment of profanation. "I am old," he said quietly, his words carrying in the silence. "I have lived many years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have seen fashions change like the wind." He paused, his eyes meeting those of each of his sons in turn. "But the covenant is eternal." Apelles stepped forward, his hand on his sword. "Choose carefully, old man. Your next words may be your last." "You offer us life," Mattathias continued, his voice growing stronger. "Life without meaning, breath without spirit, existence without purpose." His hand moved to his belt, where an ancient knife, one used for ritual slaughter, hung hidden beneath his robe. "The great king offers us life beyond simple survival." A local man, Jason, stepped forward then. He had already taken a Greek name, had already begun attending the gymnasium in Jerusalem. "I will show them," he announced. "I will show them how to live." As Jason moved toward the altar, incense in hand, Mattathias' heart was flooded, not with rage, but with clarity. In that moment, he saw with perfect vision what must be done. The knife moved like lightning, catching the morning sun. Jason fell, his blood mixing with the pig flesh on the alien altar. Before anyone could react, Mattathias had turned, his blade finding Apelles' throat with the precision of decades of ritual slaughter. "Mi el Hashem Ilai," he roared the ancient battle cry of Moses. "Whomever is for the great king, come to me." Judah was first, his hidden weapon already in hand. Then Jonathan, Simon, Eleazar, and John. The small Greek garrison, caught completely by surprise, fell quickly to the fury of men who had nothing left to lose but their souls. When it was over, Mattathias stood in the blood-stained square, his priestly robes forever stained with the price of rebellion. He turned to the stunned crowd, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "Let all who are zealous for the law and who stand by the covenant follow me." Night fell over Modian like a burial shroud. The bodies of Apelles and his men had been quickly buried, but the evidence of rebellion could not be so easily concealed. Mattathias gathered his family and closest followers in the deepening darkness. "We cannot stay here," Simon said, his analytical mind already calculating the consequences. "Antiochus will send an army within days." "Let them come," Judah declared, cleaning his blade. "We'll meet them here." "No," Mattathias interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of divine wisdom. "The great king preserved Moses in the wilderness before the deliverance of our people. So must we now flee to the desert places." Jonathan, ever the diplomat, spoke up. There are others, Father. In villages across Judea, there are those who still hold to the covenant. They wait only for a sign, for leadership. In the hours that followed, runners were sent out into the night. The message was simple. Those who remained faithful to the great king should flee to the hills. The wilderness would become their sanctuary, the caves their synagogues, the mountain paths their highways. As dawn approached, a stream of people began arriving at Modi'in. Families carrying what little they could, priests clutching sacred scrolls, young men with hidden weapons. Mattathias watched them gather, his heart both heavy and lifted by their faith. "See, Father," John, his youngest son, whispered, "we are not alone." The exodus began before sunrise. Mattathias led them into the wilderness of Judea, into the maze of wadis and caves he had known since childhood. Behind them, Modi'in stood empty, a silent testament to their choice. In those first days, organization emerged from chaos. Simon, with his gift for administration, began arranging the refugees into manageable groups. Judah assessed every able-bodied man, noting those with military experience, those who could be trained. "We are not bandits," he told his first group of fighters. "We are not rebels. We are the army of the great king." The wilderness transformed them. Soft hands grew calloused, scholarly backs straightened, and sons of priests learned to wield swords alongside scrolls. There weren't only physical changes, their spirits were being forged. Eleazar, who had always been the most zealous of the brothers, found his role teaching the young men the forgotten warrior traditions of their people. David was not just a king, he would tell them during training. He was a warrior who danced before the great king. We must be both warriors and worshippers. In hidden valleys, they established camps that could be dismantled in moments. Women taught their children in whispers, maintaining their traditions away from Greek eyes. The sound of prayers mingled with the clash of practiced swords. One evening, a scout returned with news that sent a chill through the camp. "A Seleucid column approaches Modi'in," he reported. When they found the town empty, they began questioning people in nearby villages. They're offering rewards for information. Mattathias stood at the edge of their camp, looking down at the distant fires of the Seleucid search parties. Jonathan joined him, his diplomatic mind already working. "They'll find sympathizers," Jonathan said quietly. "Not everyone is strong enough to resist gold." "Then we must give them something else to believe in," Mattathias replied. "Riches of eternal value." That night, Mattathias gathered his sons in his tent. The old priest's eyes burned with prophetic fire as he spoke. "The great king did not preserve our people through the ages for us to see the covenant broken in our time. We are not fighting for ourselves alone, but for all the generations to come." He turned to each son in turn. "Simon, you have wisdom. You will be the mind of this resistance. Jonathan, you understand men's hearts. You will be our voice to those who waver. Judah, the great king has given you the spirit of a warrior. You will be our sword. Eleazar, your zeal will keep the fire burning in our people's hearts. And John, your faith will remind us what we fight for." As his sons absorbed these words, Mattathias made one final declaration. "From this night forward, we are no longer just the sons of Modi'in. We are the guardians of the covenant. The great king will fight for us, but we must be worthy of his battles."